One of the areas that we researched at Westminster was this is a book called Understanding the Placebo Effect in Complementary Medicine, edited by David Peters, colleague of mine, who's professor. I think he may be retired now. He's an osteopath. And the following extract is from my chapter in that book, and it's called Psychoanalysis, Complementary Medicine and the Placebo. So bear with me for a moment. It starts off, Mr. X and the nocebo. So the nocebo is the opposite of the placebo. I'll start with a case from my work as an acupuncturist, taken from my chapter, Complementary Medicine, Psychoanalysis and the Placebo, in that book. Some 15 years ago, and actually I was writing this in about 2000, so maybe the case was in 1985, before I trained to be a therapist. Some 15 years ago, I was a recently qualified acupuncturist. A man walked into my consulting room suffering from acute rheumatoid arthritis. He was a small man in his late 20s with a pronounced fear of needles. And his symptoms were severe enough to keep him off work. He tried conventional treatment without any lasting success. And he turned to acupuncture in desperation. But he was too frightened, because of his fear of needles, in the first session to allow me to insert any needles. And instead we talked about the origins of his fear, in the hope that if we could understand it, he might be able to overcome it enough to let me treat him in the next session. Mr. X, as I shall call him, was one of those people who have an intuitive grasp of their own psychology without ever having been in therapy, and with very little prompting from me, he went on to describe his relationship as a boy with his much-loved grandmother. She was a large and friendly woman, and he was in the habit of a morning of climbing into her bed and romping about before she got up. And he recalled with obvious emotion a particular incident as a 6-year-old. On the morning in question, he climbed into her bed as usual, but noticing that she was very still, he began tugging at her to wake her up. Eventually, he succeeded in rolling her over. But to his horror, she fell out of bed, pinning him to the floor underneath her. Trapped and panicking, his cries eventually alerted the other adults, who came and removed her dead body from on top of him. She died in the night, and he dated his fear of being trapped and helpless, and hence his fear of acupuncture, to this incident. Following this account, Mr. X gradually became able to tolerate my needles, and I began treating him according to the principles of TCM, traditional Chinese medicine. He responded well, and within a few treatments, he was able to return to work and gradually reduce the frequency of his sessions. Things progressed in a satisfactory, if unspectacular manner, until one day when he missed an appointment. It so happened at this time that I was having trouble with people cancelling appointments in what I considered a casual manner, and having recently started psychotherapy myself, where missed sessions are charged for, I decided to tackle him about it when he turned up for his next session. In order to do this, I chose the time when he was lying on the couch with the needles in, as this is a fallow time not taken up with what I considered the more important business of information gathering and diagnosis. He told me that on the day in question, he'd set out as usual for his appointment, only to find that British Rail had changed their timetable. He said he understood that I'd lost my income for that session, but he didn't feel inclined to pay the fee himself, since the change in timetable wasn't his fault. I commented that it wasn't my fault either, and in the end we settled on a compromise where he paid half the fee, and apparently satisfied, he walked out. I was horrified when he hobbled in, racked with pain for his next session. The redness and swelling had returned to his joints, and he was off work again, in as bad a state as when I'd first seen him. My first thought was to check my treatment notes, but there was nothing unusual about the points I'd used. Next, I asked whether he'd done anything different himself since we'd last met, but he said he hadn't. Puzzled and disappointed, I could see no option but to continue with the treatment as usual, which I did. When the session ended, he thanked me for my help and said that he didn't want to spend any more money on a treatment that had stopped working. And it was my lunchtime at this point, and as he turned to me one last time, he asked whether I thought the mind could have an effect on the body. And I said I was sure it could, but I asked him what he meant. In time, now outside the official session, He proceeded to tell me with great vehemence how I'd made him feel in the previous session. I'd known about his fear of being trapped, so he found it incredible that I'd chosen his time on the couch to confront him about the money. He'd felt pinned down by me and my needles, unable to express his anger about being charged anything for a session that he'd missed through no fault of his own. And he attributed the return of his symptoms directly to this experience, went on in this vein until exactly half a session's worth of time had passed. He turned and left, leaving me feeling crushed. So that was just something to illustrate how the dynamics of the therapeutic relationship and how the mind can affect the body in quite powerful ways.